Welcome to our Tea Time program. Today, our honored guest is Dr. Patrick Walsh from Dublin, Ireland, who will speak on his new book, 44 Days, Karabakh from Occupation to Liberation. Between 1988 and 1994, during the First Karabakh War, Armenia invaded 20% of Azerbaijan. Almost 1 million Azerbaijanis were expelled from their own lands and became refugees. For 30 years, the Minsk Group failed to bring any resolution to the conflict. No wonder. Minsk Group was chaired by France, Russia, and the US. In 2020, the Second Karabakh War reversed the disasters of the First War, and Azerbaijan recovered its lands in a 44-day heroic battle which ended in victory. Just this past November, we all celebrated the second anniversary of this victory. Dr. Walsh is one of the top scholars of the Caucasus region, has done extensive research into the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict as early as 16th century, and studied the Armenian colonization of the Karabakh region forced by the Russians. I strongly recommend his website, drpatwalsh.com, where he has many comprehensive research articles on the region. Dr. Patrick Walsh is a historian, political analyst, and educator. He has written many research articles and more than 20 books, with particular interest in British foreign policy, the First World War, Ottoman Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. He also written extensively on Irish history and conflict in Northern Ireland. Dr. Walsh received his PhD from Queen's University Belfast and bachelor's with honors from the University of London. His well-researched articles and books present a refreshingly different view from the many well-worn and repetitive European and American accounts, which always carry a degree of bias. This is the fourth time Dr. Walsh has been our guest, and we thank him very much for his time. And I would like to thank our technical team, Erkan Şahin and Ezgi Esen. Now, the podium is yours, Dr. Walsh.
No problem. Thank you very much, Oya. It's always to you, and it's also a pleasure to talk about the book I've just. It's just about to be published, actually. The initial copies have come off the print run. We're just actually putting a few maps at the start of it, and that's really the only thing that's holding back, the initial print that can be sold. So it should be ready pretty soon, within the next few weeks or so. Anyway, as I said, you've got a picture of it up there. That's great. 44 days, Karabakh from occupation to liberation. And essentially, where did it come from? Well, during the war or just before the war, I had a book published, a very large book on the Caucasus, the history of the Caucasus over the last 100 years, really. And it essentially looked at, the geopolitical conflict between Russia and Britain. And just after the book was published, the actual Second Karabakh War broke out. I've been writing some articles just prior to the war about some of the incidents that were going on, particularly Nikol Pashinyan's provocative behavior and the fact that he was going to incite a war if he continued in the way he was actually operating as Prime Minister of Armenia. And when the war broke out, on my website, I really wrote a commentary. Every week I wrote an article or so about what was going on, because essentially we weren't getting the full story in the West. And I wanted to try to inform people. There was a lot of Armenian narrative really essentially dominated the Western media. And I thought it was inadequate for an understanding of both the issue and the events that were occurring. So I wrote this ongoing commentary, and really the book sprang out of there. I was persuaded to turn this into a book, and this involved some sort of more background research and background additions to bulk it up really to the full. I think it's run into about 300 pages. So essentially, that's where the book came from. So what was the book really centered on? Because it's obviously called 44 Days, but it isn't really about 44 days as such. The 44 days do feature in it towards the third part of the book, but there's a couple of earlier parts of the book. I have a list of the chapters here in front of me here. The first really section, there's actually 44 chapters, believe it or not. They're pretty small chapters, as you can imagine. But essentially in part one of the book, I look at the issue itself, the issue of Karabakh itself. Chapter one looks at, I asked the question, Karabakh, whose territory? Because this was a big issue in the West. There was constantly, it was said, that the Karabakh was a sort of an Armenian place within Azerbaijan. Of course, what I do in this section is I challenge this viewpoint. And I show historically that the Armenians, or the majority of Armenians in Karabakh, are actually a product of a colonization process by Russia from around about the mid-19th century. And, there's a lot of deception and a lot of misinformation about the Armenian population of Karabakh. So I go into the historical element of that at the start. And I look at things like the Armenians and Caucasian Albania, the historical issues around Caucasian Albanian settlements, state, people of this 19th century. I look at the Karabakh Khanate and the Russians, the Armenians as a colonizing element in the region. And then I go on to look at independence, the Azerbaijani independence around about 1918, May 1918, and the British role and Karabakh. And then I look at the Soviet period, the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, which was an attempt by Stalin essentially to settle the national question in the region. Then the seventh chapter looks at Gorbachev, Perestroika, and Karabakh, how Gorbachev destabilized the settlement that Stalin had put together in the 1920s, as well as destabilizing the USSR itself, and the effect this had in the region. Then I look at an issue that sort of comes up quite a lot, the Sumgayit question. There was basically a sort of a killing of a couple of dozen Armenians in a town outside of a city outside of Baku, Sumgayit. And it's sometimes referred to as the start of the war. I look at this obscure issue and, first of all, show it certainly wasn't the start of the war. But also I see how this has played a part in the Armenian narrative to sort of distort the general history of the conflict. So then I look at the separatist campaign led by the Armenians really, and the response to this in Azerbaijan itself, and how Azerbaijan is really taken aback by this separatist campaign. Really does not know how to react to it. Depends upon the Soviet authorities to repress it. And when they fail to do this, and the Soviet state itself goes into a state of collapse, Azerbaijan is really placed on the back foot. It's taken aback, and it can't respond very effectively to a movement to basically take over its territory. So that's really what the next part of it is. So that leads me to looking at the first Karabakh War itself. And some events within that, the Hujali massacre, and other terrible things that really happened in the war, the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 people, and the deaths of 30,000 people in the war. And I look really and see, why Azerbaijan lost this war, and how the Armenians were able to take over this Karabakh and the 7 surrounding districts. So a very extravagant victory. So that's really what the first section of the book is. So the second part really is about why the Second Karabakh War of 2020 came about. So it looks at the period really between the First Karabakh War and 2020. It first looks at the Armenian defiance of international law and the UN Security Council resolutions, the 4 resolutions that were passed condemning the Armenian occupation of Karabakh. It then looks at the idea of what the Armenians called Artsakh, which was the occupation of Karabakh, and why this is actually a pseudo state. It was a pretend state. It wasn't. The Armenians, Yerevan, pretended that this was a separatist entity, but it was far from it. And I go into the details of that. I look at illegal settlements that the Armenians constructed against international law in the occupied region. The next chapter looks at what I call it the poisoned fruits of victory. And essentially what that was about is how the actual occupation of Karabakh was a drain on the Armenian state. And it actually had negative features which paralyzed the Armenian state, made it economically dysfunctional, and essentially was a great drain on Armenia's both its independence, its economy, and its political stability. So I look at that aspect. The next chapter looks at Ter Petrosian's warning. You know, the fact that he warned his people that essentially, if they did not make a settlement with the Azerbaijanis through the Minsk group, that time was running out, and essentially there would be a reckoning in the future. And it was he was removed from power at this time, and essentially his warning went unheeded. So that chapter's about that. The next chapter really is about the OSCE Minsk group and the failure of the international community to basically bring about a settlement. So it looks at the diplomacy in that. The next chapter is about the April War 2016, which is a sort of a rehearsal for the 2020 war, where there was the Azerbaijanis started using drone warfare. It was a very limited 2 or 3 day affair, but it did have lessons. And one of the biggest lessons actually was the fact that Russia did not intervene very quickly in this conflict, and this should have been a warning to the Armenians. The next few chapters really about the arrival of Nikol Pashinyan and essentially how he destabilized the situation. He came initially as a sort of a peacemaker, making a lot of noises about getting a settlement with regard to Karabakh. But then when he was attacked by the opposition, he decided to become basically an ultra nationalist and started talking about things, or through his ministers started talking about new war for new territories, engaging in provocative acts, and essentially sabotaging the what was the Minsk diplomacy. So we have, I looked then at the opposition to Pashinyan and what it was trying to do and how it unsettled him, and his maneuver against it, which was essentially, as I said, becoming an ultra-nationalist and a provocateur, which essentially brought the war on. And the last chapter in this section really is about the July hostilities, Tovuz, the incident that finally, I think, settled the matter that the Azerbaijanis would have to go to war to resolve this, because this was a very serious development, and there was actually a lot of popular anger in Azerbaijan about the killing of some Azerbaijani servicemen and civilians along the line of contact. And essentially, this was the event just in July 2020, which began the build up to war, so to speak. So the third part then is really about the Second Karabakh War and the 44 days itself. So I look at the preparations for war that the Azerbaijanis made, the Azerbaijani state, the Azerbaijani army, and the training that was undertaken in conjunction with Turkey, and also other plans that were the battle plans that were put in place, the equipment that was bought, the exercises that were undergone, and I look at all aspects like that. That this plan had been put in place for the day when it had to be enacted, and this day had come really in September, in late September 2020. And then I look at the start of the operation, which was known as Operation Iron Fist, and you know, the opening days of the war, and I look at that, and then the first ceasefire, the first attempt to really try and bring about a sort of a resolution quite early on in the war. And then there's a chapter about Western misrepresentations, because this is the thing that sort of spurred me to writing, really, was the misrepresentations, the misinformation that was occurring in the Western press. And so I deal with that, and I look at the examples of that. And then that takes me on to the resumption of the war once the first ceasefire collapses. And so I look at the military events and the captures of territory that the Azerbaijani army was achieving. The next bit really is essentially about Russia. This is a very important part of the book, because I saw during the war that the most difficult thing that the Baku government had to think about was, would Russia intervene in the war, and when would it intervene, and under what circumstances would it intervene? The Armenians were continually calling for intervention to rescue them, but Russia was not intervening, and Russia basically told the Armenians that you know, that Karabakh was not part of Armenia, so it didn't come under the CSTO treaty, and essentially they were on their own in respect. So this chapter looks at all this diplomacy, basically between Putin, Pashinyan, and Aliyev, and it looks at the sort of like knife edge situation in politics that very important issue shows. I looked at President Putin's intervention of October the 19th, which was really Pashinyan's chance to escape from the war, and he turned it down. He basically decided that if he had agreed to a peace settlement that Putin was putting forward, he would look like the loser. So he decided to fight on, and that was a fatal mistake, really. That was October the 19th that occurred. I then look at the analysts, the Western analysts and Russian analysts, and what we find is they got this war quite wrong. There was very few analysts that got this war right. Most thought that the Azerbaijanis would be stopped by the Armenians, that essentially they were very incapable of taking the highland part of Karabakh, Shusha and the other areas like that. So I look at the analysis and see how it was wrong, and why there was mistaken conceptions had. And they were often about things like the Azerbaijanis couldn't fight, their bad record in the first war, the Armenians would be superior to them, things like this. And I look at all those sorts of aspects and show how wrong they were, which was borne out by events, actually. Then we look at, there's a chapter on the role of technology, drone warfare, deep battle warfare, sophisticated battle coordinated systems that Azerbaijan employed that were used by Turkey in Syria and were applied to the Karabakh War. So I look at these sorts of technical innovations that were first seen in abundance in the Karabakh War. And then I look at the resumption of the war and politics and war, you know, the political aspects of the whole conflict, you know, before looking at the final phase of the war, which essentially was the Azerbaijani army really held the ground to the north and to the east of Karabakh, but drove along the southern plains, pivoted north towards the Lachin corridor, and then headed towards Shusha. And I look at that period of the war and what was going on militarily on the ground. That takes me to the armistice of 10th of November after the Battle of Shusha, and I described that in quite a bit of detail. I got some accounts from it and things like this. So essentially what a great achievement that was, the special forces scaling the cliffs and taking the Armenians on the summit of Shusha and fighting for 3 or 4 days until the Armenians realized the game was up and decided to essentially surrender. So, it's a great story, the Battle of Shusha, and it was really the crowning moment of the war. So then I look at just, why the war is halted at this point. This is a very important thing. Why did the Azerbaijani army had really large Armenian forces surrounded? It could have possibly finished them off. It could have headed towards Khankendi, what the Armenians call Stepanakert, the main center of Armenian population. But there was, at this point, the war was managed, an end game was managed essentially by Putin and by President Aliyev in conjunction with Pashinyan. So it came to a sort of a solution whereby the Azerbaijanis called a halt, and in return for the return of all the areas around Highland Karabakh, mountainous Karabakh, they basically essentially stopped the war. And I look at the issue of that, whether that was a right decision. I conclude it was the correct decision for a number of reasons. So I look at that. I look at the Russian role in relation to this. And then finally, I look at the record of the Minsk group, how it failed, and how the actual new development of a Turkey-Russia axis has had an effect on the geopolitics of the region. And then finally, there's 2 sorts of chapters to round it off. I look at the Russian-Armenian relationship and what that might hold for the future. And finally, the initial period after the war, I look at the Azerbaijani efforts to repopulate, reconstruct, and bring about Pax Caucasia, the peace process in the Southern Caucasus. So that's basically what the book does. So it tries to look at the 44 days, in context, in a comprehensive political and military fashion, to try and to bring out the whole story, really, essentially the whole story of the events.
Excellent. We know so little of the details because when it comes to the Western press, you really can't trust. So there are so many, I learned so much as you, and I thought I knew a lot, but as you went over that, it will be a fantastic reading. So is the book published now, or is it just waiting for, you said there is some wait period, you're waiting for some more addition to it?
Yeah, essentially it should be available, I'd say, in a few weeks' time, because it is actually, there are some copies printed, but we decided, just to add a few maps at the start, and we were just getting hold of those maps over the last couple of days, and they can be quite easily inserted just before the first print run, So it should be available, I'd say, within a month anyway, so it's imminent. Let's say it's imminent.
Yeah. Would it be available, the PDF or the e-version of the book?
I'm not 100% certain about that. I know it's certainly a physical copy. I'm going to find out if there's an e-version of it as well. So I'll find that out. It's been printed in Istanbul and London. Printed in Istanbul, actually published in Istanbul and London by Visible Press. And so essentially, I will provide details when it is available. So as I say, it is imminent, and I'm actually receiving a few copies there in the next couple of days that have been printed without the maps. But we're waiting just for the final thing, because the maps are quite important, because to let people know where places are, and it's It's quite difficult to read about the capture of places without knowing exactly where they are and stuff.
Yes, the maps are really. There are a group of academicians, historians in Turkey. I'm on their website. They were asking if the PDF would be available or how they would get the book. So I'll tell them it will be soon. Well, it's and then it will be on Amazon, or we can get it through regular channels, I think. Order it.
Yeah, well, I'll find that out as well. I mean, I'm just actually finalizing those things, and usually the author always has these. It's always the publisher who does these things, and you sort of have to find out the situation at when it's done, sort of thing. So hopefully there'll be a PDF version of it as well. I know some publishers are prone don't like doing PDF versions, and others do. So we'll see. Anyway, today now, most people do produce these PDF versions.
Well, now the most difficult part started, the peace and the settlement. So what do you see? Where is it going? I've been reading your article about Russian version and Washington's version. So what's happening? What is the latest?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I was going to actually talk about that entirely today, but I can give you a brief synopsis. I mean, if you look at there's two positions, really. You have the Armenian position, which, Pashinyan made quite an interesting speech in September where he said that, Armenia consisted of 30,000 square kilometers. And basically that's what he was saying there was to his opposition. He was saying that, Karabakh is not part of Armenia. I mean, he effectively was saying, Karabakh is not part of Armenia under international law. It's not part of Armenia in terms of recognition of other countries. And it cannot be part of Armenia because Armenia has not got the military force to actually take it over. Because it just lost the war. So essentially what he was saying was, to the opposition, you've got to scale down your ambitions. Now, that doesn't mean that Pashinyan has given up on Karabakh. He knows that could be political suicide within the domestic affairs in Yerevan. But I think what he's trying to do is basically to try and offload Karabakh to Russia. And what he thinks, why that's useful to him is essentially he hasn't got the means to obviously return the situation to its pre-2020 occupation status. So what he's trying to do is really to deprive Azerbaijan of the victory of reincorporating its sovereign territory within the state. And he's maneuvering in this. And it's also useful for him for another reason, that if he can offload Karabakh, he can get rid of a lot of intransigent Armenians in Karabakh, and perhaps even the opposition within Armenia. He can settle, he can basically wash his hands of the situation and say, look, we've lost this, we can't get it back. These people will be safe if the Russians are looking after them. So I think this is the strategy that he's adopted. The Azerbaijanis, on the other hand, have essentially set down 5 principles for the settlement of the issue, and you can't really argue with these principles. They're essentially that international laws has to be obeyed, the current international borders need to be delineated but accepted as they are, essentially. So that's really the Azerbaijani position. I think that the Armenian position about having Karabakh having a status is really dead, because when we think about this, why was there a Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast? It was because the fact it was part of a socialist settlement. It was part of the USSR. In other words, it was a socialist attempt to solve a national problem of a mixed nationality area. But the socialist state is dead. The communist state is dead. The USSR is finished. Now we live in the era of nationalism. So any sort of status, ethnic status for this region is totally inappropriate to the nationalist era. This was a settlement from the communist era, from the socialist era, where there was open borders, where there was comradely interaction between communists in Azerbaijan and communists in Armenia, where the national struggle was supposed to be over and the class struggle began. So, you know, this is a bygone entity from a bygone era. It doesn't have any relevance, and in fact all it will do is regenerate ethnic conflict if you get this status return. So, you know, the Azerbaijanis are completely right about this. The other important thing really that we're seeing is essentially a sort of competing peace processes, a parallel peace processes that are developing. I had to write these down actually because there's been so much activity over the last 2 or 3 months. We've had, for instance, meetings in New York with the Azerbaijanis and Armenian foreign ministers in September. We had meetings in Geneva with the foreign ministers. We had a further meeting on 5th of October in Prague with the leaders, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan. We had further foreign ministry meetings at Astana, at the Astana conference on the 14th of October. And finally, on the 31st of October at Sochi, we had meetings between Putin and the two heads of state. So we've had a whole series of meetings. In fact, the peace process has gained a lot of momentum in the last 3 months, mainly because there's been a competition developing within it, essentially because America's re-entered the actual peace process, and this has tended to push momentum into the system completely. So Putin tried to recapture the initiative because really, essentially, after the armistice, after the trilateral agreement in November 2020, it was really Russia had complete hold over the future peace process. And it was really going to be Putin who was going to manage the process in conjunction with Pashinyan and President Aliyev. But, America's managed and the EU have managed to muscle in. Really, they've recaptured some influence after obviously the failures of the Minsk period, which really did, which really didn't do the West very much good in relation to, solving the problem. So they've managed to muscle themselves in again. And this actually has had one positive effect, that it has pushed renewed momentum into the process. Now, I think it's an interesting thing because Putin has essentially tried to worry Pashinyan about the West, because I think Putin has been concerned at elements in Armenia, and in fact Pashinyan himself, that have been moving towards the West. They felt that Russia's let them down. They felt that Russia is more aligned to Azerbaijan, is more taking into account Azerbaijan's interests. And essentially, so there's been a sort of a movement in Armenia to try and get Armenia out of the CSTO, to get the Russian bases out and really to rely on the West. And I think the Nancy Pelosi visit actually put more momentum into that type of movement. So Putin's sort of like counterattacked in that at the Valdai Club. He said that there was two competing peace processes, and he basically said to the Armenians that the Western peace process essentially gives Azerbaijan everything they want. The Russian peace process recognizes the complexity of the Karabakh issue. So the hint that essentially was that there might be, that was the carrot that might be given to Yerevan if they stick with Russia. The stick was, Putin also said something on the lines of, well, if you reject the Russian peace process, you'll be on your own with the West. So you'll have to totally rely on them. So essentially, Putin is obviously jockeying for position in this, and I think, but from one point of view, I've seen articles written to say, Azerbaijan is should accept the Western offer, but there's good reasons why Azerbaijan won't do this. They'll be skeptical, they'll be cautious about the Western offers. But mainly, one reason would be that if they did, Armenia would instantly go to Russia's side, and that, of course, would then cause a big problem, and there would be a geopolitical split in the whole process, and that could cause problems. There's other issues such as the experience of the past in 1920, when the West really let the region down, and the Red Army came in only a year and a half after Russia looked like it was broken. And so I think people are aware of history, that it is mindful to recognize that Russia will be there no matter what happens in Ukraine. So I think that people are being cautious, and Azerbaijan finds it hard to move until they know what Armenia's move is going to be. So essentially, I think it's quite a complex situation developing. Now, I just had a wee thought about this. I just want to finish off with this, Oya, really. I had a think about how we could sort of solve this situation. I'll just put forward a proposal. I've written an article which will be published pretty soon, but I wanted to deal with this because I think this is quite a dangerous situation that's developing. On one respect, there's a geopolitical competition occurring over the peace process, which is good. It's a positive thing. And if all participants are prepared to do positive things for the region, that's great. If the EU are prepared to support the region with money, with development, if the Americans are prepared to sort of, make sure that the peace process is pushed on, it's great. It's very, very good. And if Putin does, fulfill the thought that he might be an honest broker, well, this is all very, very well and good. But there is a danger this could be part of this escalating geopolitical conflict that we see in Ukraine. So I had a thought about how we could possibly, make sure that things might be resolved to everybody's benefit. So I tried to think of various things that could happen. So my suggestion, I had a think about this, and I think apart from the 5 principles that Azerbaijan is actually advancing, which I don't think anybody can disagree with, I think even the Armenians will accept them, except the only problem Armenia has with these 5 principles is essentially they want more, they want status and stuff like this for Karabakh. But apart from the 5 principles, which are very, very reasonable, I think my proposal would be this, that the South Caucasus should actually be a neutral buffer zone between Russia and the West. It should be a neutral area. I think there should be no foreign forces stationed in any of the 3 countries of the South Caucasus, i.e. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia. Okay, I think that there should be no membership of global military alliances. So in other words, this would exclude both NATO and the CSTO from the region. And I think that there should probably be the 4th point, establishment of Transcaucasia Intergovernmental Council that would regulate economic development, security, and various other issues between the 3 countries. Now, the reason why I think this would be a very good idea, this basically neutralizing the region, would be that this is the thing that would secure a peaceful Russian withdrawal from this region. And I think that's the thing that's really essential, that there has to be a negotiated peaceful Russian withdrawal, because this would have great benefits. It would secure Armenia's independence and sovereignty. It wouldn't have Russian bases on its territory. It wouldn't have Russian forces, and essentially it would be able to become independent, a real independent state, and develop its links with Turkey and Europe much more to the benefit of its people. Also, I think it would stop foreign powers manipulating various forces within the region, whether they be in Armenia or Georgia or anywhere else. So essentially, I think that would be a very good thing. And it would also prevent the sort of tragedy that's occurred in Ukraine, being carried over into the South Caucasus. So if we could get, the regional powers to agree to this, We're talking Russia, the United States, Iran, and Turkey. If we can get these regional powers to work maybe within that context, perhaps we can achieve something great for the South Caucasus as a model for regional cooperation and global peace and security, which is a thing it desperately needs. But so, I mean, I just put forward these suggestions. I don't know how practical they're going to be, but I think there's benefits from Armenia, for Georgia, and for Azerbaijan out of these suggestions. And well, let's see what happens.
It's excellent suggestion. It's too good to be true, actually. Armenia has a lot of opposition now within Armenia itself, and diaspora is going crazy in the United States. They are totally out of their minds. Well, I have 100 questions to ask you, but I think you have to come back again and see where the peace process is going, because it's very important for Turkey and important for us. It's very important for the region, and we have to have stability and peace there. So thank you. This is excellent, and I wish we can have the whole day to talk, but we'll do a follow-up section after the book is published. And what happened to your suggestion? Does it have Aliyev's ear? Does it have Pashinyan's ear? Do you have direct contact with these people or their advisors? Is that it's very exciting and very sensible, and I hope some agreement comes to that. But in the meanwhile, there are all kinds of noises coming from the area, and we are dealing with a very wild, out of control diaspora here, which is getting desperate by the day that the peace is coming. And I have to, we have to talk again, that's for sure. And it's been very quick, 45 minutes, and thank you so much. And keep us posted on the developments. And then you're going to publish your suggestion in your website. Is that going to be an article about it?
Yes, it will probably be published first by Azar Focus, which is a sort of an Azerbaijani a newspaper. It has a website, Azar Focus, Azerbaijan Focus, in London, and I will also include it on my website as well when it's published. So it'll be in the next week or so. Yes. Excellent.
Also, just add a middle initial to your name, so it gets. There are famous doctors called Pat Walsh. So all you get prostate cancer. All you get prostate cancer. I'm dying, page after page after page. Finally, I sent you the address. That directly takes us to the website. It's a longer, the one I just sent today. So do some changes. So whether it's the Armenians that are covering it up, or whether the Pat Walshes are just too many in the U.S. So middle name would be great to add, or middle initial, or the name, or whatever. Anyway, it was great to have you, and thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to the next meeting with you, the next program. And thank you again very much.
Well, my pleasure. Again, it's lovely to speak to you again, and I'm sure we'll do it again. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.